Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this episode, I have a conversation with Director of Global Missions, Jim Ritchie. Dr. Ritchie was elected to this position in February of 2024, and before this, served as the Regional Director for Eurasia. In this conversation, he tells of his call to ministry, how God has used him for the church, and what his hopes are for the years to come. I'm here with Global Missions Director, Jim Ritchie. Happy to be with you today. Just to get us started, tell us where you're calling in from, where you're zooming in from.
And good to talk with you, brother. Yeah, I'm calling right now from the regional office of Eurasia. And that is in a little town called Busingen, which is an enclave of Germany within Switzerland. It's a strange European thing. But so we live in half in Germany, half in Switzerland, a beautiful part of the world. And that's where the regional office is for Eurasia. And I've been here with my wife, Maggie, for the last 4 years.
So rewinding the clock quite a bit before that, but just share a little bit. How did God call you to salvation and ministry?
Well, I got saved at 16 in a little town outside of Glasgow in Scotland. My big sister became a Christian, and I was not a church attender. Our family were on the fringes of church, and then all of a sudden, my sister came to Jesus, and through her witness, my parents, my other sister, and then in time, I started to see the reality of their faith. And so at 16, I gave my life to Jesus, and I was part of an evangelical congregation where we believed in 2 Sunday services, prayer meeting on a Wednesday, youth Sunday night. You tithe your income. It's all for Jesus. And that's what I grew up with, and I loved it. And about the age of 18, I started going on what we called summer missions, where for 2 weeks of the year, we'd go to other parts of Scotland and we'd do street evangelism, late night kids, youth work, summer camps, VBSs. And I just, at that point, had a really passion for telling people about Jesus.
So prior to that, when you were saved, were you born into the church? Were you born into the Church of Scotland, or was you?
No, actually, my story was a very typical one for the west of Scotland, where really half the population was Catholic and half was Protestant. Mum grew up in a Catholic family, dad grew up in a Protestant family. And really, when they got married, they didn't go to either church because neither church was particularly welcoming for what in those days was called a mixed marriage. So mum and dad, they always believed in God. I knew that. They had great moral values. They were good people. They lived what to some people would say a good Christian life, but they didn't know Jesus. And then when they got saved, they would tell their friends, "We've become Christians." And their friends would say, "But you've always been good Christian people." And they said, "No, we've repented of our sin. We've given our life to Jesus. And we're going to live for him." And so when they became Christians, it was radically different for our family. It really wasn't, yeah, church is there, you go along, you pay your dues. Now it was 100% living for Jesus, holy lives given over to him.
And so after your salvation experience, did you know you wanted to be in ministry at that point in time? Did you know shortly after that, did you go off to University of Edinburgh, or where did God pull you at that point in time?
Yeah, I mean, so when I got saved, the church I was in was very missional. So we would do street evangelism, open air services. The youth would go around other churches and sing and speak. And I was given an opportunity, maybe 16, 17, to share my testimony and then to start giving kind of little sermons. And I just had a real passion for speaking about Jesus. And I knew that I was going to be either an evangelist or some kind of speaker or somebody who would communicate the gospel. And then when I went on my first summer missions, I would be preaching. I'd be preaching on the street, preaching. We would go into pubs and I would sing and talk about Jesus and very evangelistic. And I knew then it was a calling to ministry. So Maggie, my wife, she was on a summer mission team with me in 1982, and we fell in love. We loved mission together, and so straight off of the bat, in September 1982, we went to Glasgow Bible College and started training for ministry.
And at what point in that time period did you? A lot of people, have talked. This is one of the first things I heard about you when you became the regional director. He used to be in a Christian rock band, Triumph.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
how did that develop in there? Was
yeah,
that around the same time? You
yeah,
always were a lover of music, and you thought, "How can
yeah,
I use this for the Lord?" kind of thing. So,
yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. I loved music. I loved a lot of the rock bands of their day. I mean, I loved good music. And then when I became a Christian, I did see a gap in the music that we would sing on a Sunday. Not that I didn't like it, but I thought all of my friends who don't know Jesus, this is not going to really be all that relevant to them. And so when I was at Bible college, I really wanted to try and communicate through relevant music, but really gospel lyrics talking about Jesus. So a couple of friends and I got together, started rehearsing. We were awful at first, but we got better. And then the band started to take shape. I was the lead singer and the bass guitarist. We wrote our own songs. Our songs were they weren't in any way oblique about the gospel. They were very in your face. A lot of the lyrics were lifted straight out of the Bible, and we would sing in universities and colleges, schools, pubs, church halls. We were invited to Christian festivals. And then we got a record deal with a Christian record company in the UK. And then we started recording albums. We got quite a following in the UK and Europe with the band Triumph. But always, it was never about being well known. It was never about being the best band in the world. It was always about how can we use our music to communicate the gospel to young people of our generation.
and so while you were lead singer in Triumph, you were still doing preaching ministry as well, or was that kind of on hold, or how
Yeah,
was
I mean,
that?
it was a combination. We started the band whilst I was at Bible college. Then I took up a couple of roles as a youth pastor in churches, and the band was part-time. And then the band really did start to take off, so it became full-time, and that was my ministry. But I actually used my preaching gifting in between songs. I would communicate. I would talk about Jesus. We would have altar calls. I mean, we've had altar calls in places where you wouldn't believe, and people come to know Jesus on the streets and bars and universities and college campuses. And so the music and the preaching always went hand in hand. And I would be invited to go and speak at churches as well, and particularly to young audiences, to the youth groups, to youth conferences. And so I always kind of kept the preaching going whilst I was doing the music as well.
And so at that point in time, that was all in the 80s, or
Yeah,
when did you move into kind of full-time ministry? Because you were
yeah,
in the Church of Scotland. Did I read
yeah,
that correctly for a
yeah,
little bit?
yeah.
Okay.
So in the 80s, the band, 83, the band was really starting to get together. By 91, 92, we really felt the Lord saying, time for something new. And we got together and still played, for years later. We would play at festivals and church events. But in terms of ministry, I felt a real call to be a pastor. And so in 1992, I went to Edinburgh University to the Faculty of Divinity, and I did my bachelor's in divinity and then my master's of theology. So I was there 5 years, then working as an associate pastor, a student minister in different churches until I was ordained. And then I became a pastor in the church. And my ordination was initially with the Church of Scotland.
So during that time period, what was the most influential book you read, or ministry leader or professor that kind of maybe, influence you the most, or you think about, this kind of changed my course and how I was thinking about things and whatnot?
Oh man, there would be a lot.
Yeah.
Both in terms of the Bachelors of Divinity, it was quite highly academic at Edinburgh University, a really ancient, faculty, going back to like the 15th century. And John Knox and the Reformers, were all around that area. So I would be influenced by a lot of material. I was also, somebody who loved seeing what was happening in church planting, in new churches, new expressions of ministry. Um, I did dissertations on really interesting things. I wrote one dissertation on the theology of the movies, contemporary theology and communication. I wrote a paper on the movie Braveheart,
Ah.
being Scottish, and it
Yeah.
was called A Salvation Story. And I really saw a lot of the themes in movies that actually were people reaching out for something bigger beyond themselves.
Yeah.
And so I was influenced a lot by media, communication. How do we communicate in this secular space the truth of Jesus Christ as God's Son, who died on a cross, rose from the grave, fills people with his spirit and transforms their lives. So it was very much a passion of mine to see, well, how can we communicate in the generation that we're in?
So after university, not long after university, you were connected with the Church of the Nazarene, or how did that work that you became aware of
Yeah.
the Church of the Nazarene and that connection?
So I was involved with planted a church in Scotland, and I became involved in something called Clan Gathering, which was a big summer festival. 4,000 or 5,000 people would come together, and I was one of the leaders of that, a speaker at that, and I was also a guest speaker regularly around the country at events and different churches. And there was a
Oh.
Church of the Nazarene in the city of Perth that had invited me to go and speak there on a number of occasions. And I loved it, and we enjoyed the fellowship. And I was still in the Church of Scotland at that point. Theologically, I was starting to see maybe some things that were coming into the church that I wasn't sure was where I wanted to be. Some cultural changes, some things in terms of secular morality that I felt the church was maybe I wasn't sure where they were heading. I loved the Church of the Nazarene, and I believed the theology and the way that the church was in terms of mission, holiness, really grabbed me. And then one day the church reached out to me and said their pastor had left, they had a vacancy. Would I be interested in becoming the pastor of the church? Which is interesting because I wasn't a Nazarene at that point. And yet I met with the church board, we spoke it through, and the Lord gave me a very, very clear calling, that I could work for the Church of the Nazarene or be part of the Church of the Nazarene. And I felt I don't want to work for them. I want to be one of them. So man, I was straight in. I dived right in, and I found this family that I didn't realize I had of Nazarenes. And then in time I became a DS and then a regional director, now global missions director. And it's just crazy how God grabbed my heart with this church and said, this is who you are. This is where you belong. I love the Church of the Nazarene. I believe it's a miracle what God does in and through this church.
You transitioned from regional director to global missions director, but you were regional director over Eurasia.
Yep.
For our listeners, for me as well, tell us what the role of a regional director is like. I know some of our listeners, that term might be new to them. So
Sure.
what is the role of a regional director?
Well, let me just explain the kind of structure of the church is that obviously we have local churches. Everybody, you got your local church, but each local church is part of a district. And the districts then are part of fields, and the fields are part of regions. And there are 6 global regions in the Church of the Nazarene. We have South America, Mesoamerica, Africa, Asia Pacific, USA and Canada, and Eurasia. And each region has a regional director who's responsible to work with the Global Missions and the Board of General Superintendents in oversight of the fields, in support of the missionaries, and in support of the districts all over the world. So I was the regional director for Eurasia to support all the mission work and all the church planting work and all the church development work across all of the nations, 50 nations in Eurasia.
And in that role, you say 50 nations, but that goes as far east as Russia. Right? That Russia is the farthest eastern. Is that correct, or is it even farther?
It goes even farther. Let me tell you where Eurasia has, Nate. Eurasia in the west has all of the Mediterranean. So it's all Spain, Italy, France, Portugal. It has all of the Middle East, Israel and Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Cyprus. It has Scandinavia in the north. It has Northern Europe of the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, then into Central Europe, and then from Central Europe into what's the former Soviet Union, so Ukraine and Russia. I mean, in the Central Europe, there's like Hungary and Croatia and Romania and, so many of these Central Europe nations where the church has been, now for 15, 20 years. Then the former Soviet Union, which after the Berlin Wall fell and communism collapsed, the church has moved in and worked in Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Central Asia. But then it goes even further. It goes to India, all of India, 1.5 billion people, I think, the biggest population in the world now, even bigger than China.
Yeah.
And then South Asia, which is Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So right across those, I mean, the landmass is unbelievable. The population is something like 2.6 billion, which is over 25% of the whole world lives in Eurasia. And you have every philosophy, every religion, every way of thinking, and every way of living and being, from incredibly rich countries and cities like Rome and Paris, London, Edinburgh, Munich, all the way to churches in remote villages and poor areas up the side of the Himalayas in Nepal, everything in between.
And some areas that are major conflict areas. I think of Israel and Gaza and Ukraine and Russia, and really during your time, both of those happened. So how does the church operate through that? In those type of tough situations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We actually have an active conflict also between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Yeah.
And we've got great churches in Armenia, Russia and Ukraine, with districts there in both countries. In Israel and Gaza, we have so many wonderful Arab Nazarene leaders in the Middle East, as well as people who have come through the Jewish faith to become Christian. So, and there's so many mixes there, and the conflict between the nations and the people is incredible. But the reality is that in the church, there's love and there's unity and harmony. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, if you're in Ukraine or you're in Russia and, your politicians are telling you these people are our enemy, that's a difficult situation to be in. But we believe that Jesus can bring unity and peace. Psalm 46 says he makes war cease to the ends of the earth. And that is my prayer for these areas, that he'll stop the conflict, but he'll retain the peace within the church. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's hard to bring everybody together, just being really honest, but we still have unity and we still have hope. And the church, we still have that conviction that we're Nazarenes. We are one family and we love one another. And that is, people say to me, are you pro-Israel? Are you pro-Palestine? And I'd say I'm pro-Jesus. And because I'm pro-Jesus, I'm pro-people. And I don't want anybody to be killed in any of these areas. I want everybody to know the love of God. And I pray for peace and reconciliation. Politically, that looks different, obviously. And thankfully, that's not my job. My
Yeah.
job is to support the leaders there who love Jesus and love their neighbors.
So as you're moving into the global missions role, still a bit new, but from how
Yeah,
you see it, tell our listeners what your job will look like, in that new role.
yeah. Yeah, thank you. I was elected in February at the General Board, and I started orientation, March. Started in 1st of April as the actual job. So I've been maybe 3.5 months. So I'm still new. Part of my job is to oversee the mission enterprise of the Church of the Nazarene, to support our missionaries, to raise up new missionaries, to send missionaries out, to support our missionaries, to follow the church's missiology and the church's vision statement to make disciples to the end of the earth, to make Christ-like disciples in all the nations, to help support the regional directors, the field strategy coordinators, the finance coordinators, the missionary coordinators, to work with NMI and NYI and NDI, to work alongside our Board of General Superintendents, to fulfill the church's calling, and to support the church in all of the enterprise of mission, and to be really connected to the local church, because the church has a mission and the mission has a church. And those two things must be connected, that people know what we're doing, they know where we are, they know how to pray, they know how to give, they know how to get a calling to go on mission, and they know what it means for the Church of the Nazarene to be in 165 global nations across the earth.
And in this new role, you shared with me a bit, but our listeners are going to want to know, where are you going to be at? Where's your new home going to be in this new role?
Yeah, well, I currently am a Scotsman living in Germany and Switzerland, but then I'm going to be a Scotsman living in Kansas. And my wife Maggie and I are moving to Lenexa in the middle of August, and our new home will be there. We'll be at the GMC working from there, and then I'll travel as necessary to support the regions around the world. But my team will be based in Kansas, and I'm really excited to be there.
That's great. So growing up in Scotland, here's a fun question. If I was going to travel to Scotland, what are a few things that I would need to do being in Scotland?
You would have to accept the weather changes very quickly. You'd have to have an umbrella with you. It rains a lot, or a good hat. You should eat haggis, which is the Scottish national dish. And I'm not sure if the listeners would want to know what haggis is made of, but just trust me, it's tasty. You should try it. We have a national soft drink called Iron Brew, which is kind of like I think it's the only country in the world where Iron Brew outsells Coca-Cola. I don't think there's another country in the world where a local drink outsells. So you should try Iron Brew. You should visit some beautiful cities: Edinburgh, Glasgow, Perth, St Andrews, Stirling, Inverness. If you want to play golf, there's some of the best golf courses in the world. And there's good people there. And if you see men with what looks like a skirt on, it's not a skirt, it's actually called a kilt.
So before this interview, my wife was looking up the worst questions to ask someone from Scotland. And the first question was, what's it like living in England?
Yeah.
As a joke, people do that. But in the Church of the Nazarene, there's a Northern Irish district, or Northern Ireland district that covers Ireland and Scotland. And then is it the Southern district that covers England? Is it in Wales? Is that how it works? Or break it down for me, because I know I just shooting in the dark there.
You're nearly correct. So there's
Okay.
a British Isles North District, and that was the one that I was district superintendent of. That is Scotland, Northern Ireland, and the north of England. And then there's British Isles South District, which is all of the rest of England and Wales. Yeah.
So is there what is your favorite sport?
Oh, for me,
in Scotland.
Yeah, soccer. I was a soccer player.
Okay.
Loved soccer, played soccer. My two sons played professional soccer in Scotland. I love watching soccer. I can still kick a ball, but I can't run like I used to.
Yeah.
But I enjoy other sports, golf. I love athletics. Rugby is a great sport. I know it's taken off in
Yeah.
other parts of the world and North America as well. Um, but I think all sports. I'm excited about the Olympics that are
Yeah.
starting soon. I love athletics. I used to run. I was a sprinter as a younger guy. I love boxing. Did a little bit of boxing when I was a kid, and my wife has never enjoyed me watching boxing on TV. She thinks it's barbaric. But I just love sports, yeah, and men and women's sports. I've really enjoyed watching how women's soccer is taken off in the UK. And I have three daughters and two sons, and they all love sports. They were sporty themselves, and yeah, I mean, sports is a great thing. But my soccer team is Glasgow Rangers.
Glasgow
Um,
Rangers. Okay.
and there's two big Glasgow clubs, Glasgow Rangers, who play in blue, Glasgow Celtic play in green, and I mean, it's really a divided 50-50 city. And I'm on the blue side.
And so you mentioned it a little bit, but golf was invented in Scotland. Is that right? Is that where the sport of golf comes from?
Yeah, it comes from St Andrews in
St.
Scotland.
Andrews.
Yeah, and that's the home of golf. Yeah,
Yeah. I think I read curling was also a Scottish
it
sport as
is.
well.
It's a Scottish sport. And you get your ice rinks, and you get your curling stones and a brush, and you shove
Mhm.
that thing down the ice. And yeah, I mean, it's like, in the Winter Olympics, there's lots of places play curling, and Scotland does quite well.
Yeah.
But I think Canada, USA, some of the Scandinavian countries, they're good at curling as well.
You mentioned Braveheart, but what is your favorite movie, or what movie have you watched recently? You think this is a movie that
Yeah,
I enjoy?
yeah, I love Braveheart. I actually was really moved by the Passion of the Christ when that came out. That was important for me. It's not a movie, but I love the Chosen series. I'm a huge fan of the Chosen. Movies, recently, what have we watched? We watched Top Gun Maverick. I thought that was a great movie.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed Maverick. I mean, Maggie and I, we like to watch. She likes a rom-com. So romantic comedy.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I enjoy watching it with her to an extent. Um, but I like action movies as well. And yeah, I'd probably say in the last year or so, my favorite movie probably was Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah. Do you guys like going to movies? Is that something you enjoy doing?
Yeah, we do. We don't get there as often as maybe we'd like to, because we're busy. We'll maybe watch stuff at the weekends when we're free on Netflix and Apple
Right. Yeah.
TV. But movies, the last thing I went to in the movies was with my wife and one of our daughters. We went to see Inside Out 2,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
the
Yeah, that was a
Pixar
good one.
one. And yeah, my wife and daughter loved it, and I liked it. I thought it was a good movie. I probably didn't like it as much as they did, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was fun. And yeah, we've got three grandkids, and we love being with them, and they love all the the Disney, Pixar
Yeah.
kind of things, and like Frozen and Toy Story. So enjoy watching that with them.
So do you find yourself when you're watching movies breaking down the theology, the
Yeah,
philosophy?
yeah, I
Do you like
do.
to do that when you watch them? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I really do actually. I mean, I can enjoy them just for enjoyment's sake, but I
Yeah.
also see the philosophy. I see the cultural themes. Some of them I don't like, if I'm being really honest.
Hmm.
Some of them, I see the challenges for the church in there. I see the way that the world is thinking and how the world's encouraging people, particularly young people, to think. And I think, well, as a church, we've got a challenge here
Hmm.
to communicate an internal message into a changing society. Um, I see a lot of themes of, social justice and
Hmm.
diversity and inclusion. And, there's kingdom justice themes right through scripture,
Hmm.
where some of those values are good values. But the world, I think, has changed the values to have a particular bias
Hmm.
um, that is challenging. So I love to see, well, in one sense, what's the church up against? What are we communicating to? And if I'm in missions and I'm the leader of our missions and I want us to communicate all over the world, really effectively, what do we need to know about the world? What's our
Yeah.
context? And, missiology is communicating in the cultures that God takes us to. How do we communicate? How do we do pre-evangelism and evangelism and church planting, church development? How does that happen all around the world? So when you see what's happening in society, culture, particularly entertainment, you get an idea of what's going on and how what the church is facing.
So, if you're wanting to share or willing to share, what do you think some of the biggest challenges facing the church are? You kind of mentioned a little bit there, but
Yeah.
specifically, do you have anything on your mind that the church could be doing better here or
Yeah,
defending here?
yeah. I mean, I think apologetics with grace is really important for the church. And nobody wants a smart aleck church that tells everybody, that we're right. Nobody wants a church that's arrogant. But I do think we want a church that's confident in what we believe in. And I think good apologetics and the confidence in the gospel, not ashamed of the gospel, I think that's really important. Everybody knows that, particularly in the West, you know, um, human sexuality is a big, big talking point. It's a big deal. How do we live holiness lives in all areas of our life? And how do we as a church love people and yet stay completely committed to the call that God gives us through Scripture to be transformative? I love that as a Nazarene church, we have compassion as a great value. I also love that we have personal salvation, that people can be filled with the Holy Spirit of God. They can be changed. They can have an entirely sanctified life through the Spirit of God in a world that would not have any interest in those values. So I kind of don't want this kind of smart aleck church that knows all the answers, but I do want a confident church that believes in transformation through the gospel.
In closing or in thinking about this,
Mm.
you kind of gave us a lot there that we could be praying about. But as you're thinking about your role,
Yeah.
what are you praying about? And what are your hopes for the Church of the Nazarene? We kind of talked about the challenges, but what do you hope to see in the next few years? And what can our listeners be praying with you about?
Thank you. I think let's think of what's existing right now. I want us to pray that we have healthy, committed, authentic Nazarene churches all over the world that transform people's lives and the communities around them. That we have the resources, both in terms of people, prayer, finance that our church gives to send people around the world and to support them whilst they're there. That local churches are raised up in their own culture, that we don't have a globally dependent church where they're just a franchise of the church in the West, but a local church that is really authentic to their culture, but with the holiness gospel as part of how they live. And for the future, I'd love to see an army of new young people raised up, living, radical holy lives for Jesus. An army of new missionaries that come and give their lives to the church and to the Lord and say, send me where I need to go. Tell me where I'm needed, and I'll go there and I'll live for Jesus and I'll love people for Jesus. And I think that generation's out there. I really do. I believe that it's our job to inspire them, to discover them, to equip them, and to send them. I'd love to see unity within the Church of the Nazarene right across the board in terms of our vision and our values, believing what God has called us to do and going after that. Sometimes we get distracted and sidetracked by things that are not the big issue. The big issue for me really is that we are Great Commission people. We've been told by Jesus what we have to do. And I pray that the church will be courageous, bold enough, and committed enough to get on with that job until the Lord comes back.
Thank you. I will be upset if I don't ask this question. So it's, the Loch Ness Monster.
Yes.
Is the Loch Ness Monster real or not, from your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, as Scots, we've signed a non-disclosure clause on that. We're not allowed to say.
You can't speak on that now.
No, we're not allowed. We're pleading the fifth on that.
That's good. That's a
I
good
think if I
answer.
said no, the people who live around that area would be very angry at me because it would
Yeah.
affect their tourism.
Their tourism. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, let's
That's
keep the
funny.
mystery.
We'll keep it a mystery. It's been a pleasure to be with you. We hope to do more of these in the future. Happy to have you back anytime, but it's been a
Thank you,
pleasure to
sir.
be with you this morning.
Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.